Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Festivus, Happy Holidays in general, just be happy, dang it. Because today, we're gonna be going into a subject that's not so happy. Yay. We're gonna be talking about the career of John Should Be Behind Bars Kricfalusi, and if you're getting tired of that joke, I'm not gonna retire it until it comes true. This guy has had one wild career, going from just a lowly entry-level animator to making one of the most popular cartoons of all time, and then doing a number of other things that we'll talk about towards the end. Let's just enjoy the good times while they last, okay? And I want to make this clear, this isn't a full retrospective on the life of John K. It's more of a general overlook at his career. What steps did he take to lead him to where he is now? What kinds of influences changed him as a person and creator? That sort of stuff. And it's thanks to Rhyme Time Town that we have this idea. Not a Patreon raffle review, but it's the gift review of 2022. Thank you, Rhyme Time Town. This one was a lot of fun to make, he says before he finishes recording. Anyways, gather around, friends, and listen to the tale of a sick little monkey. The history of John K's career. From an early age, John Kricfalusi loved animation. He grew up on watching the classic Warner Brothers cartoons from Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, and the wonderful Dover Boys. Being exposed to them from an early age would help shape not only his passion, but also his style. As he would say in an interview years later, "I went to Sheridan College for a year, but mostly I learned by studying old cartoons on videotape. Cartoons from the 1940s and 50s, the old Clampett and Jones Warner Brothers cartoons, and the Tex Avery MGM cartoons. When I was a kid, I used to copy cartoon drawings from newspaper comic strips and from comic books. I also used to copy all the old Hanna-Barbera cartoons designed by Ed Benedict. Huckleberry Hound, Yogi Bear, Flintstones, etc." Like he mentioned, he attended Sheridan College for 1 year and then dropped out. Still, he was able to get in contact with one of his old heroes, Bob Clampett. And through Clampett, he was able to get a job at the prestigious Filmation Animation Studio. Yeah. Filmation is not exactly known for its animation quality, and it's known much less for its creativity. This is the studio that made He-Man and Fat Albert, by the way, as well as the original Ghostbusters show from the 1970s. Being at Filmation was a miserable experience for John K. He liked to be free and unrestricted and getting the ability to make whatever he wanted. Filmation was the exact opposite. Everything was really stiff and limited and very controlled. To the point where if a model sheet was wrong on a character, John would have to animate them that way until a new model sheet could be made without the error. Bureaucracy at its finest, people. In 1980, John K. would get his first chance to really express himself creatively by making the animated short, Ted Breaks One. It's a 1-minute short about a chicken getting something stuck in his butt and running around screaming. John said that this was his first foray into intellectual animation. Let that sink in for a minute. Despite this thought-provoking and deeply philosophical intellectual piece of art, John was still working at animation studios that he hated, ones that wouldn't let him be himself. But that would all change when Ralph Bakshi entered the scene. Yep, the same Ralph Bakshi who made Fritz the Cat, Hey Good Lookin', and Coonskin. See, Ralph was contracted by the Rolling Stones to make a music video for their song Harlem Shuffle. But the deadline was made way earlier than expected because the Rolling Stones were up for a Lifetime Achievement Award the next year. So Ralph needed to hire more people, and John K. just so happened to be one of those people. And the rest was history. According to John K., he would basically become Ralph Bakshi's protege for the next few years. Ralph would teach him more refined ways of making his craft, as well as giving him more experience that would look good on a resume. One such piece of experience was The New Adventures of Mighty Mouse, a Saturday morning cartoon revival of the Terrytoons character of the same name. This show was accidentally pitched to CBS by Ralph Bakshi, and John K. was brought aboard to help make it come to life. If you're wondering how Ralph accidentally pitched this to CBS, well, let me tell ya. In the 1980s, it was just about impossible to greenlight a cartoon if it didn't have either A, a celebrity, or B, a connection to a toy line. Ralph wanted to pitch a Saturday morning cartoon, because, when I think Saturday morning fun, I think of Fritz the Cat. But none of the networks would take his ideas because they didn't have any of those connections that I just discussed. So, when Ralph was pitching things to CBS, he lost his temper and blurted out that he owned the rights to Mighty Mouse. And CBS agreed to produce the show. Only problem was, Ralph didn't own Mighty Mouse. Yeah, he just said that so that they'd give him a job. Alright. I mean, who hasn't lied on their resume at least once, right? The New Adventures of Mighty Mouse was a gigantic hit, but not because of the name attached to it, no. It wasn't Mighty Mouse that got the views. It was the fact that the animators and writers were able to do whatever they wanted. In the exact opposite vein of Filmation, Ralph encouraged the people behind the show to push the boundaries as much as possible. And of course, even if he was just at an entry-level position, John was able to put a lot of himself into his work. In fact, if you watch some of the episodes of The New Adventures of Mighty Mouse, you can see a lot of aspects that would go into what would become Ren and Stimpy years later. Though it could also be argued that during his time on the show, John was able to learn how to drive a production crew insane. John stuck so closely to Ralph's side that he was able to see all the craziness that Ralph was bringing, like, I don't know, stopping production for an entire day so that the whole crew could stop what they're doing and look for Ralph's car keys? Yeah, that happened. After the first season of Mighty Mouse was done, John felt that it was time to spread his wings and go out on his own. What did he go on to do? The New Adventures of Beanie and Cecil for ABC. This thing barely lasted a month because of the constant infighting. John wanted to do exactly what Ralph did and push the crew to be as out there and creative as possible, and while ABC was originally okay with that, they backed down really quickly and there was constant network interference. With that being said, John didn't help matters either. In fact, I'd argue that he actually made things worse. Whenever the network would try to fight him on his creative decisions, John K. would not only double down, but quadruple down, quintuple down, whatever the next step is. You get what I'm trying to say. It got to the point where ABC refused to air a lot of the episodes because of their incendiary content. The Clampett family, most specifically Bob Clampett, once again were the ones who gave John this job, and while they didn't like the show, they couldn't tell John that, and they wanted to be supportive of him because, well, he's a friend. Even though The New Adventures of Beanie and Cecil only lasted a month, this was the first time we got to see who John K. really was as a creator. He was someone who wanted it his way and his way only. No compromise, no middle ground, just his vision, no matter what. And that's not exactly how the business works. The reason that Ralph was able to get away with so much on The New Adventures of Mighty Mouse was for two reasons. One, he knew how to play the game. He did that old Animaniacs trick, or I guess Animaniacs did the old Ralph Bakshi trick, where when they would submit the scripts, there would be one really bad, really offensive joke that the network would get really upset with. And Ralph would fight constantly to make sure that joke stayed in. But then eventually, he'd give up and say, okay, well, we can get rid of this joke, but these other more tame-ish jokes, they can stay, right? And the network would never know that this was his plan the whole time. And the other reason is just because, well, when the episodes were being screened by the censors and something raunchy came on, Ralph would distract the guy watching the episode by talking about sports or coughing loudly. Yeah, these were things that John K. wouldn't do, or didn't know how to do. Instead, he resorted to overcompensation, which, sadly, would become a running theme throughout the rest of his productions. Once The New Adventures of Beanie and Cecil was cancelled, John moved on to his next project, which would be with this little-known TV channel called Nickelodeon. They were announcing that they were going to start this brand of creator-driven cartoons. No longer would animation have to revolve around toys or celebrities. Animators could make whatever they wanted. Within reason, of course. Knowing John's knack for creativity and self-expression, he jumped at this opportunity, and he pitched Our Gang. Yeah, not Ren and Stimpy, it was a completely different show. Side note, he also pitched a show starring Jimmy the Idiot Boy, but that didn't really go anywhere, so that doesn't really have a lot to do with the story. Just thought I'd mention it to avoid the comments. Nickelodeon wasn't really crazy about Our Gang or Your Gang, whatever version it is. It changes titles a lot depending on who you talk to. But a Nick executive named Vanessa Coffey saw two elements of the pilot that she liked. More specifically, two characters, Ren and Stimpy. It was through her advice that John went full force with making Ren and Stimpy the main characters of the show he pitched. And sure enough, after the pilot Big House Blues was created, Nickelodeon signed on, and John K. would be making one of the first 3 Nicktoons. And needless to say, the one he was making was gonna stand out the most. What were the other 2 about? There was Doug, a normal everyday kid going through everyday normal kid things, Rugrats, a show about everyday normal babies going through everyday normal baby things, and Ren and Stimpy, which, simply put, was about utter madness. The studio behind Ren and Stimpy was John K.'s own studio called Spumco, which was named after Raymond Spum. Raymond Spum isn't a real person, it's a joke character that John K. created claiming that he's the father of all animation. Working at Spumco, while rewarding, would prove itself to be a very difficult ordeal. When it came to animation, John K. had talent, no one could deny that, but what he didn't have was tact. He would run his crew ragged with his impossible standards. There would be times where animators would present fully completed scenes to him, but then he would just draw something else on a piece of paper and go, "Why didn't you make it like this?" Because of John's rampant perfectionism, it would become a very common occurrence for episodes of the Ren and Stimpy show to get massively delayed. In fact, it even became an animation industry in-joke. But it was all worth it to see all these kids all over the country, hey, even all over the world, smile and laugh because of something he made. Each and every episode was exactly the way he wanted it. Every episode was 100% John's artistic vision come to life. No, that was far from the case. Because John was never able to finish the cartoons, at least in his eyes, he would have his name removed from many episodes of the show, even fan favorites like Nurse Stimpy. And then there was the fighting with the network. Oh boy. If you thought the New Adventures of Beanie and Cecil was bad, get a load of this. John K. seemed to think that just because Nickelodeon was greenlighting creator-driven cartoons, that meant he could get away with anything, and Nickelodeon most certainly kept him in his place. Sometimes, yeah, they were a little over-paranoid and overprotective of their child audience. But at the same time, if you look at a lot of the early drafts of the scripts for the first season and a half, as well as listen to the accounts of other people who worked on the show like Bob Camp and Billy West, John was trying to put in really nasty things. I'm skipping ahead a little bit here, but the adult party cartoon episode Naked Beach Frenzy was originally pitched to be in the Ren and Stimpy show itself. Yeah, the Naked Beach episode was gonna be shown to kids if John K. had his way. Knowing what we know about him now, that makes a lot of sense, but we're not there in the story yet, so let's move right along. This all came to a head when John made the episode Man's Best Friend, an episode full of tobacco references, toilet humor, and a really brutal scene where Ren beats a character half to death with an oar. Understandably, Nickelodeon had enough of him after this. Because of his constant insistence to put in things that were not kid-appropriate, as well as the fact that the show was constantly behind schedule, John was let go from his own creation. And for those of you who are ready to type in the comments, stop. John K. himself said that these were the 2 reasons why he got fired. It comes directly from the horse's mouth here. And while John is not necessarily the most reliable source when it comes to, well, himself, given what got cut from the Ren and Stimpy show and, hey, what actually made it in the Ren and Stimpy show, I think this is a valid account. John K. didn't take getting fired from the Ren and Stimpy show well at all. In fact, he tried to get a bunch of his other crew members, including the voice of Stimpy, Billy West, to leave right alongside him in protest. This didn't work, and none of them ended up leaving, so it was just John who was kicked to the curb. The show would get taken over by Nickelodeon's own animation studio, Games Animation, who would proceed to run the show into the ground. John would later say that all these people who didn't leave right alongside him were being disloyal and ungrateful, and how dare they? And sadly, at the time, a lot of people believed what he said. Most notably John Hughes and Simpsons creator Matt Groening. However, this would not be the end of John K's career. It was only the beginning. In 1988, before I sold Ren and Stimpy, I pitched a whole lot of cartoon shows like Hee Hog, the Atomic Pig, and the guy laughed through all the pitches. But at the end he said, "This is great stuff, but I can't buy any of it." He knew it was funny. But he said he had to be honest, and that the only kinds of things he could sell were those that could not be financed by the toy companies. And the only kind of cartoons that they were interested in were big action characters. You had to have characters that were really violent and go out there and rip up the world. So I went back and I told the other cartoonists I was working with and said, you know what? Let's give them what they want. Let's give them something that rips up the world even more than any of the other cartoons that are out there. And we came up with The Ripping Friends. The Ripping Friends was a short-lived kids show about superheroes being idiots, and that's kind of it. When John was originally pitching it, it was very difficult, but eventually, he sold the show to Fox Family, and it was all downhill from there. Just like with Beanie and Cecil, there was a lot of executive meddling who were out there to quote-unquote neuter the show. All of the raunchy material had to be toned down, the crazy Spumco art style had to be lessened. Really, what was the point of making the show if you didn't want it to be like, well, a John K. show? That was the sentiment that a lot of people had, and John K., who wasn't originally that involved with the production, tried to step in halfway through the first season to make things right. But it was not to be, because not only was the show not doing very well, it was also ridiculously expensive, costing $400,000 per episode. So yeah, The Ripping Friends didn't get a shot at a second season, but that's okay because John had something else on the horizon that was a lot more, I wouldn't really say important, but something that was a lot more personally connected to him. A second chance at Ren and Stimpy. The channel TNN, or as it would be called in a few months, Spike TV, was trying to launch its new branding with a series of adult cartoons. Spike sought John K. out and gave him one more chance to do Ren and Stimpy, but this time, do it for adults. John K. would be allowed to make whatever he wanted with no network restrictions whatsoever. And boy did he run with that, taking things way, way too far. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. The old gang at Spumco was back, and they were ready to bring Ren and Stimpy back to life. But when it came time to bring the cast back together, you know, the cast of two, Billy West refused to sign on, saying that this show would damage his career if he became a part of it. So instead, he was replaced by Eric Bauza. With the exception of the episode Altruists, each episode in Ren and Stimpy Adult Party Cartoon, as it was now called, were recycled scripts or ideas from the Nickelodeon era that the network wouldn't let them do. Once again, all the problems from the Ren and Stimpy show came back in Adult Party Cartoon. John was a perfectionist. Nothing was ever good enough. The show was behind schedule again and again. And as per usual, he tried to put in things that were a bit too much. What do I mean by a bit too much? Well, take a look at all these reviews here on YouTube and they can tell you what exactly too much might be. In short, the gross out humor, the violence, the sex, all ramped up by 100, and it was not exactly well received. In fact, a lot of advertisers began to boycott the show, which may or may not have caused the last 3 episodes, Naked Beach Frenzy, Altruist, and Stimpy's Pregnant, to not get shown in the United States. Ren and Stimpy Adult Party Cartoon was the best performing of the 3 new Spike cartoons, but that's not saying much because the whole block was kind of a disaster. Yeah, alongside Ren and Stimpy were Stripperella and Gary the Rat, neither of which were exactly, good. Even though the show was planned to come back for a second season, the advertiser boycott, the lackluster ratings, and the fact that all the episodes were just getting delayed again and again meant that not just the Ren and Stimpy revival, but also the other adult cartoons and the other cartoon they had in the works called Immigrants were shut down altogether. This was a catastrophic failure that John K's career would never recover from. From then on, he was basically relegated to doing small projects and sort of being a freelancer.
Freelancers deserve to die.
Now, don't get me wrong, these projects were a lot bigger than, say, the George Liquor web cartoon that he made in 1997. These would be things like Boo Boo Goes Wild, or making the music video for Weird Al's song Close But No Cigar. He even made a couch gag for The Simpsons. But that wasn't enough for John. He had to do one last foray into creative animation, and that would become one of the two things that would make his ultimate demise. In 2013, a Kickstarter project popped up with John K advertising a new cartoon. A new cartoon made entirely by him, with no network restrictions, no notes, just pure John K at his finest. And if anyone knows the history of Beanie and Cecil, an adult party cartoon, they probably went, "Oh no!" But if they didn't know, or were just a diehard John K fan that wanted to give him another shot, they were excited. Cans Without Labels got more than its target, and John K was all set to make his last big project. Except, that didn't exactly happen. It took years for Cans Without Labels to come out, and a lot of people didn't really know why. It was a simple story based on what his dad used to do when he was a kid, and it was no longer than 11 minutes. Why is it taking 6 years? Once again, John had to make sure every single thing was absolutely perfect. And now, for the very first time, John K's own fan base was able to see what it was like to work with him and just how bad of an experience it was. The delays, the excuses, the bad communication, all yours if you donated to Cans Without Labels. This got rid of a lot of good faith that John had built up over the years. But it didn't get rid of all of it. No, I'll tell you what did. The fact that he's well, I can't say this word on YouTube, but let's just say he's a big fan of children. Robin Bird and Katie Rice were the first girls to come forward claiming that John K had done not good things to them, let's just say. For Robin, John seemed to kinda take her under his wing a little bit, and then during a tour at Spumco Studios, he did things. And then Katie Rice was his underage girlfriend for years. And whenever she was working at Spumco Studios, because yes, he offered her a job because of course he did, she was constantly harassed by John K. In fact, the reason I consider Naked Beach Frenzy the worst episode of Adult Party Cartoon is because one of the girls in this episode is modeled after Katie Rice. Yeah, one of the girls here that you're supposed to ogle is John K's victim. And knowing John K's taste in women, probably his underage victim. Isn't that just swell? Also later, it was revealed that when Katie Rice was trying to leave John, he was actually going to use Adult Party Cartoon as a weapon to keep her in his clutches. Specifically with an episode called The Succubus. When the news broke, everyone was enraged. But also, a lot of people said, didn't we already know this? He already admitted to being this way on the Howard Stern show.
One of them's a hot chick with big cans and nice legs. Who drew that? You?
She's underage, too.
Yeah, very nice.
In order to try and save his reputation, John released Cans Without Labels, possibly unfinished. It's kinda hard to tell, especially because John would have never considered this thing finished otherwise. But he just threw it out there to distract from what he did, and it didn't work. Partially because everyone hated Cans Without Labels, and also partially because, well, a severely overhyped, bloated mess is not going to distract from your history of crime. Through his lawyer, John K would release a statement claiming that ADHD was the reason that he was attracted to young girls, and that yes, he did have an underage girlfriend when he worked on Ren and Stimpy. Okay, so ADHD is the reason you did this. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, I'm colorblind, that's why I had to set fire to this Home Depot. During this time, a lot of Spumco employees came forward stating that, yeah, John K made it kind of obvious that he was into underage girls. It was one of those Hollywood open secret sort of things. Kinda like Harvey Weinstein. After this, John would claim that he was forced into retirement and now can never work again. Understandably so, of course. In fact, if you look him up on Google, he won't show up as an animator, but as a Canadian blogger. The entire animation industry is just trying to forget this guy, really. In fact, with the upcoming Ren and Stimpy reboot that we probably don't need that's coming to Comedy Central, John's not going to be involved whatsoever. Once again, excluded from his own creation, but this time, I don't think anybody feels all that bad for him. And that is the history of John K's career. It's a wild one to be sure, but it's also one with a lot of lessons. First of all, don't be attracted to underage people. Just don't, at all. Second is learn to play the game. Not even just in the animation industry. I'm talking about in life in general. You can't always get things your way. You can't always fight tooth and nail and then come out on top. Sometimes you have to work with the other side. You have to make compromises, and John K never learned to do that. As a result, he made enemies wherever he went, and a bunch of his projects ended up going up in flames. The third is how to really express yourself when it comes to art. You should absolutely try to do whatever you can to make your vision come to life, but also learn to take notes from others. Sometimes, your input's not always the best one. Just because you're the guy in charge doesn't mean you're the one who ends up making the thing great. Case in point, a lot of people credit Bob Camp to be the reason that Ren and Stimpy was good and not John K. And seeing what John K would go on to do after Ren and Stimpy, yeah, I personally agree. And finally, this one goes without saying, get your work done. It's one thing to be a perfectionist, but it's another thing to hold everyone back and prevent progress. Sometimes you have to leave good enough alone. Throughout his entire career, John K was never able to do this. Maybe it was because of his own strong vision. Maybe it was because he kept seeing Ralph Bakshi succeed at whatever he wanted to do in The New Adventures of Mighty Mouse. Until that show got cancelled because of the snorting flower incident. I can't say for certain. I can't read John K's thoughts, thank goodness. Hopefully this story will show you what not to be when it comes to being a person in general. Whoever you are that's watching this, I believe in you. I know you can be better than John K. So please, prove me right. Well folks, thanks for watching the video. What'd you guys think? I don't really have any fun questions, I guess, because this wasn't really as much of a fun subject. I mean, it was fun to record and research, but, you know, John K's done a lot of messed up stuff to a lot of people, and yeah, I don't really want to make light of it all, so comment below, let me know, because I'm always excited to hear what you guys have to say. And here are the names of our beautiful patrons. I love them so, so very much. And if you'd like to be just like them, having your name in every video I make, then consider donating to the Patreon, which has a link in the description below. It's how I pay for the editors, after all. They do great work, and I want them to keep on going. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.